Hello creatives, my name is Tyler Zachary Karenko, fashion designer and entrepreneur. Welcome to the House of TZC, where we're building better fashion businesses together. This video is part 2 of designing my first fashion collection, where I talk about how to go from initial inspiration to those first round of fashion design sketches. My first collection, Tell It to the Bees, is inspired by love, loss, devotion, folklore, and the secrets whispered to the bees. If you want to catch up on how we came up with today's concept, the inspiration and research behind it, make sure to check out that first video in this playlist, but I'll link that down in the description below. But let's get into it. The last Tell It to the Bees video ended with us creating 4 different categories of design that will go on to inspire what we're going to sketch out today. The first one being design ideas, which are things that are going to inspire movement, texture, print, pattern, silhouette, shape, etc. All of the different design elements in the collection. And we also came up with a series of themes or overarching ideas and concepts that will kind of create like a through line through the collection or create a common thread so that they're all tied together. And then we also came up with fabrics and a color inspiration, which are just too obvious to talk about. I want to point out that this is not a static list, and nor we will pretend it to be. I'm going to draw whatever comes to my mind because that is what this part of this project is all about, just getting all of the ideas that we have onto paper, or I guess in my case, a screen. Today, we are not worried about the other types of fashion drawing, the designer hand flats, the AI technical flats, or fashion illustrations, all of which will be in later videos. Let's start sketching. And as we do that, I'm gonna jump into a couple quick reminders from one designer to another. Just remember, there's no such thing as a bad idea. We'll accept the ideas that are bad ideas. But that's okay, get them onto paper, move on to something better. Just explore what excites you. Remember, we're here to free flow, and as long as we can understand what we're illustrating, that's all that matters. And remember that we want to go as quickly as possible. So we are not here to design full fashion illustrations, nor are you here to design a new body for every type of garment. So I recommend just having different croquis that you are ready to draw illustrations onto. I recommend having a front view, a back view, a side view, and maybe a 3/4 view. If it helps, make sure you put a mood board above your illustration so you can start to pull concepts and inspiration and different shapes out of that mood board. For me, the one that you guys are gonna see pretty much the entire time this is on screen is a mood board that I first initially created when I first started thinking about the collection. It is not the end all be all. You'll kind of see what gets derived from those shapes and from that mood board. When taking our inspiration and turning it into our first fashion design sketches, our goal is to abstract and remold. We want to be able to see our inspiration, but we don't want to be too literal. I guess on the flip side, or you want to be extremely literal. As long as you're making conscious choices, that's all that matters when it comes to design. You can abstract and remold your inspiration by appealing to all of your senses as a designer. This is a muscle, so don't worry if it's difficult in the beginning. I promise it gets easier over time. You have to ask yourself how you can start to create a design based on what you're seeing, touching, smelling, tasting, hearing, or feeling. And there is no wrong way to do this. The idea here is to match an abstract central reaction, something like a sound, a feeling, an emotion, or an object, to a concrete form in design, like line, shape, movement, texture, pattern, or silhouette. In this collection, let's start with the inspiration and then turn that into the sketch. As you'll see, my sketching style is very figure out one thing, move on, figure out something else, go back, work on that, complete a sketch, then move on. Maybe one sketch comes to me all at one time, but there is no exact formula as to how you have to sketch these out. Let's start with the folklore. Really, the reason behind the collection, Telling the Bees is a practice in which most cultures will commonly associate with death. Before there is death, there is love, and ultimately, that is what this whole collection is about for me. I lost somebody that I loved. Love, and any emotion for that matter, is about as abstract as it can get when it comes to design. How do you make somebody feel something through fashion as a medium? I think in order to portray the love in the story, it's all about fabrics. We want something that's warm and inviting, maybe silky and smooth or lace. And yet our concept, Tell It to the Bees, is all about those black crepe fabrics, those heavy fabrics, those see-through fabrics, those drapey fabrics. Remember, it's about losing a loved one, so there's love and death involved, and the mixture and the combination between the two. If it's not about fabrics, it's about the silhouette. Maybe it's a slip dress to represent passion, Or maybe it's a wedding dress to represent the obvious. Or it's about hexagon patterns when cut to come together to create 3D shapes that represent the wax shapes that they create in their nest. Love, emotions, and secrets are so abstract that maybe it's about the print. And maybe the only way to portray this collection is to represent those things in the same way that abstract expressionists like Van Gogh painted his work, with loose, expressive lines in prints or patterns. Or maybe in order to portray this concept of folklore, we have to talk about the movement. Something that draws you in, something that's seductive, like a really loose chiffon or a really loose silk, right next to something that is extremely stiff, that represents the stillness of death or the afterlife. Where life and love in this collection may represent the ephemerality, I guess death then represents the more concrete answer of what happens in life. So let's switch over to death and talk about the transitory state between life and the afterlife, which is a main part of the concept here. The word death, to me, feels very ominous and dark and macabre, where I think the word afterlife seems to be more abstract and whimsical and still macabre, but definitely in a lighter tone. And I think this whole collection has a lighter tone. I mean, we are talking about honeybees after all, which honeybees and death, those two things when put together, that is a very whimsical way to look at death. I think as a designer, I tend to be more whimsical in my approach anyway. I like to create things that have this whimsical kind of fun approach with these dark concepts. I like to combat the two and make them have like a dark whimsicality. We'll pause and look up at the first mood board here real quick. I found this picture online on Pinterest of this like macrame embroidery that was kind of like offering this draping effect. I absolutely loved it. The way it's coming undone is super inspiring. To me, this kind of feels like a way of being whimsical and also talking about the death. I think that I could use this in the collection, but possibly even add more whimsy to it or more storytelling by maybe making it something more connected to bees. Maybe the bees are the embroidery and those are kind of falling apart, or maybe it's the wings of bees and the structure and how they're built and the veining of it, or maybe it is the flowers that look like they're dying and that they're coming undone. Maybe the flower can actually represent life, and the idea that those strings or the embroidery is like coming out represents the death of life. On the flip side, maybe those flowers could represent love instead of life. By the way, I use symbology of flowers in pretty much all of my work, so be ready to constantly see this inspiration come back up. Maybe another way that I could portray death in this collection is through distressed edges or distressed patterns or prints. Maybe I can even do faded prints, something that looks like it's washed away or washed out. I really like this idea of doing a silhouette imprint or a print that represents the shadow of something, because ultimately, in the afterlife, you were a shadow of what you were in life. You're only a memory now, so maybe that is a good way to go about creating a print for this collection, doing shadows of something. Shadows of flowers, shadows of people, and of course, the color palette, the fabrics. Black crepe is practically a requirement in this collection, as it was given to me by my research. That is something that I must use. Let's talk about hair, because literally the very first sketch that I did with all of these illustrations was a smoking jacket with fur sleeves. It did not feel the vibe and is not going to be part of the collection. That was a bad idea that I'm happy came out, because having that idea made me realize that I did not want to use fur or hair in this collection. I don't think it fits in the way that would make sense for what I'm trying to portray. That being said, I do want to find a way to represent the setae and the hair that is all over the bee's body. And I think I can do that through a texture manipulation or a fabric manipulation that I made a sketch of in 2019 that came from an even earlier sketch or an illustration that I did back in 2015, one of my very first fashion sketches ever, which also is in the banner of my YouTube homepage. If you go there, please make sure you follow, thanks. In that illustration, I drew out this concept where the seams were actually facing outward so that they created a fringe or a fray that is coming from the fabric naturally. That is going to be one of the major design elements in this collection, because I really like that design detail. And of course, I like referencing myself, stuff that I've done before, stuff that I can bring into the future. I really think that that is something that I really enjoy. Now we're gonna talk about honey in this collection. Honey is probably top 3 elements of this collection, something that is going to be very prevalent and honestly something that I'm not going to abstract as much. I think I want to be more literal with my approach to honey. I love its texture, I love its colors, I love its sweetness. I like what honey can bring to this collection. Between that and the bee, these really fun, whimsical elements mixed with love and death and the death of love. I think that that is a really interesting counterpoint in my storyline for this collection. I think the most common association with honey is its sweetness. Sweetness can be associated with ephemerality or airiness or lightness or even pleasant feelings. And I'm also sure that if I say the word sweet and ask you to think of a color palette, most people are going to pick those candy, light, airy blues and pinks and yellows. Again, tying those central reactions to a word such as sweet with something that is more of a concrete form in design like color. But for me, those colors are too on the nose for the word sweet, and I think the honey color palette, which is more of a rich flavor, makes more sense for my collection. Those burnt oranges, those browns, those auburns, those reds, those yellows, golden honey colors. The texture of honey is an interesting one because I don't want things to be sticky, right? But maybe I do. I think that I want to make a bio leather or a bioplastic using honey. I'm finding that honey in bioplastics does make the object a little bit more jelly-like. So maybe it will have that same texture. I don't know. Maybe not. Who knows? I want it to be harder. I want it to be more of like a paillette sequin material, so we will see how that all turns out. I'm not going to be able to portray the sketch here that I want to as easily because that is more of a concept that is hard to sketch out without actually seeing the pieces in front of me and seeing how exactly I want to portray it. So you are getting a very, very loose sketch on that honey sketch. Now, finally, let's move into the beekeeping outfits. Again, like I said, this was the initial thing that inspired the collection, other than the symbology of Tell It to the Bees. But as I pointed out in the inspiration video, I really like the elements of an apiarist outfit. The gloves, the hats, the meshes, the ventilated bodysuits, they really do remind me of astronauts. And unfortunately, I think that in a way, it kind of halted me in my tracks when I started drawing and designing these sketches, because what you're seeing here is my inability to focus on the bee suit itself, and I immediately started to take it into a spacesuit sort of vibe. And I think that it showed up so many times, but I don't think that that's direction that I want to take this collection. I do think I want it to look more natural and maybe less futuristic than what the spacesuits were giving me. I want to hear your opinions. I want to see what you have to say about the things that I'm putting together. Is the collection working for you? Do you think the spacesuits would have been a good addition? Do you think they add a new, different, and updated element that maybe the rest of the collection is missing? I do really like the whimsy that I've started to create of these like oversized gloves and of the hats with the veils and these like really stiff architectural shapes. I think that they really do show off the inspiration, the concept, and the folklore of Tell It to the Bees. Maybe using the gloves and the accessories elements is the only way that I'm going to tie in the Apiarist outfits into the collection. I mean, some of the shapes are represented from the early medieval Apiarist outfits. Who knows if I'm going to end up continuing to use that. When you start to design and sketch, you cannot be worried about things falling out of the collection, about new things entering the collection. This is a continually flowing process, and you build up as many ideas as you can and then narrow it down, and then you build up again, narrow it down, build up, narrow it down, until you just create one solid collection. So far, we've created, a lot of looks here that really represent a good direction. From here, our sketching is not over. Now we have to experiment and explore with our actual medium, fabric. Fabric sketching is when you take fabric and you figure out new shapes that you could do with your fabric. You do it with different textiles, you try it with different types of drapes, you do different types of textile manipulations, see how they can fall on the form. The whole objective here is to essentially create more looks that you could possibly throw into this collection, ways that you couldn't think of if you were just illustrating, things that actually use the medium of fashion design, which is fabric. So strap in, folks, because we will be exploring all of these in future videos. But in our next video, we are going to switch back over to the mini 4-part series where I talk about the collection that I designed for Shein. That video is going to be about the easy yet infuriating process of working with them to produce a collection. Make sure to catch up on the series on the playlist listed here before that video comes out. But thank you, and I'll see you in the next video. Sweet dreams, creatives.